Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Shmuley Show. A lot to talk about today. First of all, before we go to international affairs and the negotiations that are supposed to be happening led by J.D. Vance about Iran, let's look at domestic issues. You know, when it's 8 children who were killed, right, Gabe? 8 out of 9. So a father killed his 8 children with a weapon. He was either evil, insane, psychotic. But the question is, if he had to do it with a knife, they might have survived. With a gun, they had no chance. It brings us back to all of America's gun laws. I'm going to surprise you on this. You know, I ran for Congress as a Republican, and of course, Republicans are very pro the Second Amendment. And I was always pro the Second Amendment, but I was in favor of limitations. Number of bullets in a magazine and the AK-47 equivalent, what's it called here in America? The M16 equivalent, the AR-15. The AR-15, maybe circumscribe that. It's like a weapon of war. What the heck you need it on the streets? But I have to tell you, and I may disappoint some people, including my producer staring right at me, that I'm not in favor of any circumscription of gun laws anymore. Of gun laws. I'll tell you why. The rise of anti-Semitism has shown me that people like me need to be packing. Now, I'm not going to get into whether I'm packing or not. I'm just telling you, people like me need to be packing. The whole idea of the Second Amendment was to ensure that tyranny did not come to America, that if the government ever decided to crack down on you, like in Iran, that you'd be able to defend yourself. Now, if the people of Iran had guns, then 47,000 wouldn't have been killed by the mullahs. They didn't have guns. They were all taken away. So it's almost like you have to choose between a psychotic father who's going to kill 8 of his children, sicko, or 30 people killed at a McDonald's or at a. Do you remember that attack in Texas that was mostly Latinos, American citizens killed at which city was that in Texas about 4 or 5 years ago? At the time, I was horrified, and I came out very strongly against AR-15s. Okay, handguns, yes. But you know what? I've changed my mind. I've changed my mind because the enemies of just being Jewish in America, where people are being shot and killed. Let's just remember what happened to the Jewish community in the United States. It's not about hatred anymore, or about Candace Owens and incitement, or Tucker Carlson and incitement. We're talking about real murder. Let's see, 15 Jews killed in Australia, right near where I lived in Bondi. That was Hanukkah, that was December. 15. No, and they're not allowed guns in Australia. If some of those Jews had guns, and by the way, there were 3 police officers who weren't even engaging the 2 terrorists, and there were a couple of IDF ex-soldiers who were like either working in Australia or they were tourists in Australia, and they were begging the police, give us your gun. If you're not going to use it, but the police did, and 15 died. If those Jews were armed in Australia, the 2 terrorists would have been killed within 5. They were walking around like at a picnic. You've seen the video. They would have been killed, and 15 Jews, maybe 1 or 2, 3 would have died, but not 15. Then you have this Jewish woman, 80 years old, Boulder, Colorado, one of the most beautiful places in the world, certainly one of the most beautiful places in the United States of America, the Rocky Mountains, burnt alive as she was marching with an Israeli flag. Then you have those 2 young Jews in Washington, D.C., shot in the head 5 minutes from the White House. That was last year. If these people were armed, they might have had a chance. So, Gabe, I'm going to disappoint you and tell you that I am not in favor of any gun restrictions after seeing what's happening to the Jewish community in the United States. Now, here's what's really interesting. A lot of Americans who support the Second Amendment, like myself, a lot of them use Israel as an example. They say, oh, look, Israel, so many people are armed, and that's the way. So often, terrorist attacks in Israel are actually stopped by civilians. You're well aware of this, Gabe. You're an Israeli citizen. But actually, the truth is, as you well know, Gabe, it's very hard to get a gun in Israel. Very hard. There is no Second Amendment in Israel. Israel's afraid of giving guns even to civilians because you might leave it around and terrorists will pick it up and start killing people. But under Ben-Gvir, who's the police minister, he's made it much more accessible to get guns. Again, that I have kids in the IDF. So when they go, if they're in reserve service, of course, they're given a giant machine gun for the reserve service. The rest of the time, are they armed? I'm not going to answer that question. You'll have to deduce it for yourself. But do I believe that Israeli citizens, for example, do I support Ben-Gvir having relaxed gun restrictions in Israel? Of course. Because at least in Israel, the people are trained. It's one of the hardest questions in American society and American culture. Should the Second Amendment remain? It has to remain. It's part of the Constitution and the original Bill of Rights. And it's the Second Amendment. It's not the Fifth. It's not the Sixth. It was right after freedom of religion, freedom of worship, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of congregation. So that's how important the Founding Fathers found it. Having said that, of course, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson didn't envision, an AR-15 that could fire off, 60 rounds, in a minute, or a lot more than that probably. I'm no expert on firearms, although I have to become one, being the target that I am. So you could make that argument. Yeah, you had to load a musket and this, like if Thomas Jefferson, actually he wasn't one of the authors of the Constitution because he was America's ambassador to France when the Constitution was being written. Fun fact, he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. But Benjamin Franklin and George Washington and all the people who participated in the Constitutional Convention, if they would have known that a father could pick up a Glock with, let's say, a 16-bullet magazine and just blow away his whole family in under a minute, would they have supported the Second Amendment? I still think they would have. I still think they were so concerned about the possibility of government tyranny and that British troops would just come and, impose the will of George III, and it was only American citizens. Remember, the American Revolution started with citizen soldiers in Concord and Lexington. These were militias. These weren't professional soldiers. These were militiamen they were farmers. They had guns, and that's how they were able to push back against the British. Otherwise, I'd be speaking with an English accent right now, obsessing over whether or not, Prince Harry should be welcomed back into the royal family and obsessing over whether Prince William is bald or not. Those are not things that I really care about very much. Although I have to say, I happen to like Prince Harry because I think he stands up for his mother's honor. He lost his mother at such a young age. And I think people are very unsympathetic to him and unfairly so. We'll talk about that sometime. I think the way they treat his wife is disgusting. That's my opinion. There goes my relationship probably with Piers Morgan. But in any event, what happened in Texas with those children is horrible. And yet I'm not going to say it's the price that we pay for the Second Amendment and the price that we have to pay for freedom, but the bigger issue, of course, was this guy psychotic, and we have to know the background. By the way, I don't want to go through NRA talking points that guns don't kill people, it's people. Well, guns kill people, and he was able to kill so many people with a gun, but I still want guns to be protected by our Second Amendment rights. But I do want to know, without just quoting NRA talking points, I do want to know his history of psychosis. I do want to know if the guy had any mental health issues. I do want to know if he and his wife, I want to know all of that. Because the one group of people who should never get a gun, obviously, are criminals and psychos. Obviously, if you've got mental health issues and we put a gun, then we're the ones who need mental health help. But the people of Iran, to transition, would not have died in their tens of thousands 2 months ago if they were armed, if they had a Second Amendment. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are the ones who control the government today and who are the ones who are fighting the Americans and the Israelis, etc. It's not the regular Iranian army, who are also evil, but the IRGC are terrorists, and they're especially evil. They wouldn't have been able to kill 40 or 50,000 people with guns. With 50 caliber machine guns, if the people were somewhat armed, even with pistols, and they weren't. Or look at the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising again. Tonight is Israel's Memorial Day. Israel has lost 27,000 soldiers approximately since the War of Independence in 1947. But I always show this to you, okay? That's Mordechai Nalevich. He led the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. He's the picture that I look at every moment that I want to know what time it is on my Apple Watch. I want to see his picture. I had to colorize. We only have his black and white passport photo, commander of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. They didn't have guns. They had to get a few from the Polish resistance, broken down old guns and Molotov cocktails. And with that, they launched such a heroic resistance, and they were able to kill and send to hell about 300 SS soldiers who are hopefully frying and burning there even right now, 80 years later, and hopefully forever. But if they had been properly armed, the whole Warsaw Ghetto Uprising lasted only 3 weeks. If Poland had allowed a Second Amendment at the time, imagine if they had arms, or the Germans certainly were never going to allow it, there could have been some armed resistance, but there wasn't. So I'm looking at Gabe right now. You probably expected me to take the opposite approach and say that you probably believe, right, that because the dad had a gun, he was able to blow away, kill his own children. And if it was a knife, maybe they'd be rushed, to an emergency room and they could have survived, right? You probably are against the Second Amendment? Speak loud so everyone can hear you.
One child did escape. He was able to climb on.
Right. He had 9 kids and he killed 8. Okay, right. So one child escaped. But you're saying that if the dad only had a knife, he would have killed 2 or 3, God forbid, but not 8.
The rest would have escaped.
Okay. And therefore you want to see restrictions on guns in America?
I thought, and I think I've heard you say before, that as Jews, we do whatever it takes to save a human life.
But what if you need a gun to save a human life? I just gave you examples. Look at these Jews in Bondi where guns are not allowed. 15 Jews were killed while 2 terrorists paraded around as if they were having afternoon tea because none of the 1,000 Jews who were there for Hanukkah were allowed to be armed.
Does putting on tougher gun restrictions really contradict your point or mine? Why can't you say, like, you said he's a psycho, so we should not. How come psychos can buy guns still?
Okay, so I'm totally in favor of people with psychotic issues that we know of course, being banned from getting a gun. But I'm just saying, you see, I'm not into NRA talking points, but I do understand the slippery slope thing. The moment you start saying that this gun is banned, this gun, my fear is it's going to go all the way down because most countries in the world do ban guns. And when you do have mass shootings in other countries, as happened in New Zealand, 54 Muslims killed. It was about 54. Remember that? None of those Muslims in a mosque were armed. A white supremacist killed. Our Muslim brothers and sisters were killed. They had no guns. It's a tough one, but I have to stick with the Second Amendment. And also, we have to be constitutionalists, Gabe. We have to ask ourselves, what was the intention of the Founding Fathers? So let me ask you a question. We know that the Founding Fathers believed that if you had a musket, the government could not take it from you. They put it in, they enshrined it in the Constitution. But a musket, probably could have only fired 3 or 4 volleys a minute back then. So now I ask you, George Washington knew you could buy an AR-15 and it could fire 120 rounds in a minute, let's say two per second. Would he still have allowed Americans to buy guns?
Definitely not.
You think so?
It wouldn't even cross their mind. Remember, Rabbi?
I think they would have, because they would know that the British who were oppressing them would have the same weapons.
But the guns they were using took like 10 minutes to even put a...
I know that, but the whole idea of the Second Amendment was to make sure that no king could ever oppress the American people again, as George III tried to do by sending Hessians and mercenaries to conquer America. It wasn't even British soldiers for the most part. It was frickin' German soldiers. It was Hessians, mercenaries.
Maybe they didn't foresee how unstable the American collective would become.
Okay, but let me ask you this, Gabe. You were sickened, no doubt, by what the IRGC did to Iranian citizens 2 months ago, yes?
Yes.
Okay. If those Iranian citizens had a Second Amendment and were allowed to keep guns, do you think the IRGC would have been able to kill 50,000 people in 3 weeks? Probably not, right?
If there was a civil war with civilians and armed forces both shooting at each other, we would have seen 500,000 people.
Okay, but now you're taking it to the next level because civil wars cost countless lives, but sometimes it restores peace. Listen, you're a black Jewish man. America allowed 750,000 soldiers to die in a civil war, 700, more than all American wars combined, casualties. America lost 400,000 in the Second World War in the age of mass bombings and German rockets, but we lost 750,000. We lost 55,000 in Vietnam, 750,000 in Civil War. So let me ask you a question. As a black American, do you believe that that was a worthwhile price to free the slaves?
I'm gonna
speak loud so everyone can hear you.
Before you hook me, okay?
I'm reeling you in. I've already hooked you.
As Americans, I would talk about my own context, but we don't have the right to decide for Iranians how many lives.
So talk about the American context, fine. But you brought up Civil War. There was a Civil War in this country. It cost more American lives in war than all America's other wars combined. The Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Spanish-American War, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, to free the slaves and preserve the Union, which was the dual goals, essentially. We'll preserve the Union first, to be honest, and free the slaves was a secondary consideration, but it was still an important war goal. 750,000 of Americans died. And you're a black American. Was it worth that price or not?
I think the American people were more than capable of ending slavery
without a civil war. And yet, you're a black American speaking in the year 2026. If you would go back 150 years to 1863 and you would see that you're being whipped and your children are taken away from you to be sold on the block, and then suddenly you see blue-clad American soldiers coming to fight for you, you might just say to yourself, wow, maybe there is a hint of justice in this world.
Do you really think they were fighting for black folks?
I said the first goal of the war was the preservation of the Union. Lincoln made that clear a million times. In a famous letter to Horace Greeley, he actually said it. The great emancipator, the man who signed the Emancipation, he said, if I could end the war and preserve slavery, not extend it, but he said, I would do it. He admitted it. So I admit that too. But I'm asking you something else. You're saying America would have another way to end slavery, but that would have taken another generation at least, 25 years. Okay. So if you're a black man in 1863 and you're being beaten and whipped and your wife is being raped by the white, slave owner, and the babies that are born from your wife are being even, half white, they're being sold as slaves, or your own children that are definitely yours are being sold. And then suddenly you hear that there's an American president who is fighting the South to free you, even if that's a secondary consideration. Wouldn't you want that to happen? See, you're saying we can find another way because you were born free, thank God. You're not looking at the people who are not born free.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult it's a difficult question to answer because you're trying to get me to say how many human lives are worth my freedom.
How many? Well, not just your freedom of 4 million slaves. There were 4.5 million slaves.
Well, to be honest, every white life in America was worth the ending of slavery because they were the ones who brought slaves in the first place. So they all, in that context, even if it was such a high number of...
Well, that's not really true. Like New Englanders, so many of them were abolitionists and they fought in the war. They were actually very good people. By the way, America's greatest documentary filmmaker, Ken Burns, just did a brand new documentary that nobody watches, but I watched it. I love his stuff, about Henry David Thoreau, the great American writer. These guys were incredible abolitionists. These people that were condemning America with all their heart and soul, believing that slavery was the greatest evil. They were mostly New Englanders, by the way, Gabe. Not all Americans were evil. The South was very, very evil. And not all Northerners were absolved from, they may not have slaves, but they were deep racists. There's no question about it. Listen, even Abraham Lincoln wanted black Americans shipped to Liberia. That's why Liberia was an American colony with an American name. You don't expect the name Liberia from the name Liberation. That was Abraham Lincoln. And he also believed, our greatest president, that blacks were inferior mentally. Not all of them. He loved, what's his name? Not Booker T. Washington. He loved, God help me. He loved Pulitzer Prize winning biography. Okay, it'll come to me. You see, I'm 59 years old, guys. It's not that I don't know history, thank God. Someone criticized us the other day. They said, why do you have like a boring background? We didn't create this. These are books that I've actually read. I'm not saying that to brag. I just love to read. But I'm 59, and I think I'm starting to have senior moments. What's my name, Gabe? Okay. But on the subject of Iran, one thing is for sure. Come on, the Iranian people deserve to be armed. And just to be massacred in the streets. That's why I understand the Second Amendment, and that's why I support it. I see it right now with Iran. The mullahs can kill them because they don't have guns. And Mordechai Nalevich, the Germans were able to kill the Jews because they didn't have guns. So many people say, like, there was this myth, disgusting myth, this slander against Jews that they walked like sheep to the slaughter. What do you mean sheep to the slaughter? They weren't armed. They're standing in front of SS with freaking machine guns, and they're holding their children's hands. What are you supposed to do? Just be machine gunned? Okay. Now, Gabe, do you think that the negotiations with Iran are going to succeed or fail second time around with J.D. Vance leading it? What's your guess? Succeed or fail? One word answer.
Succeed.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Because although I lament that there's a ceasefire right now because I actually wanted to see the regime change and the 80 million people of Iran, 90 million getting freedom. I don't think that's going to happen without a ground invasion. I don't think Americans have the stomach for ground invasion. Americans will not support it. No other country is going to support it because Europe doesn't give a frickin' damn whether the people in Iran are free or enslaved. I think Americans do care, but not so much that they're going to send their boys to fight and die there again and have a mess like we had in Afghanistan. So Trump now has a choice. He either allows gas to be at $4 or $5 a gallon, or in California, $500 a gallon, and lose the midterms because Americans do vote with their pocketbook, which you can't blame them for. We all have to support our families, right? Life has to be livable, and it will cost $100 to fill up your. I have an EV, by the way, but remember, EVs, you're paying electricity. The prices are also higher. But in any event, I think you're right. It's going to succeed because I don't see that Trump can continue the war. I think he's shown incredible moral courage and incredible moral bravery. But the stock market went all the way down, and his popularity went down, and Americans don't seem to want to support this war. And why? Because we blew it in Afghanistan and Iraq. Why did we blow it? Because we didn't have enough partners. See, that's the sad thing about it. George W. Bush was a great man, but he wasn't a great president because had he created a real coalition of 30 or 40 countries who would have maintained the peace in Iraq and Afghanistan after the initial war. The war was only three weeks, and we defeated Saddam Hussein. But we needed peacekeeping troops there from 40 or 50 countries for the next decade to maintain peace. But America did it alone. And then 5,000 American soldiers died and $1 trillion. And Americans said, these people don't want democracy. This is a bunch of crap. And we're never going to do nation building again. And we have to be honest. George W. Bush was very well intentioned, but he blew it. So no Americans want to see an invasion of frickin' Iran. Not after Afghanistan, not after Iraq. Those were failed wars, right? So Trump now has no choice, which is really sad. Because what it means is that what will be the deal? Unless Trump gets three things, then this whole war tragically was a bit of a waste, even though it's not true because it degraded Iran's military capabilities. But unless he gets three things, what are the three things that J.D. Vance has to? Number one, end of all nuclear enrichment and the return of 900 pounds of enriched uranium, which can make 6 bombs already. That may be all the way down under Fordo somewhere, but America has to, go and get it. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the end of all their missiles, right? Missile development. Because the only reason Iran has missiles is not for self-protection. It's to bomb Tel Aviv. They have missiles that can reach London, that can reach Paris. They don't yet have a missile that can reach the United States, but give them a year and they will. So the end of missile. And the third thing is the end of supporting terrorism. They can't export terrorism, Hezbollah. Now, will J.D. Vance get those three things? We know Iran's never going to agree to them. That's the problem. So on the one hand, I agree with you that there may be a chance of success because Trump doesn't want this to continue because he's going to pay at the polls that are now 5 months off in November. On the other hand, if he doesn't get those three things, he kind of lost the war. If Iran continues with nuclear enrichment, forget even the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is just leverage that the Iranians are using. If Trump doesn't get the end of nuclear enrichment, if he doesn't get the end of cessation of Iran terror proxies, and he doesn't get the end of Iran's missile development, then why do we go to war? And all these dummies, these anti-Semites, they say day and night. I love it. The whole talking point now, of course, is that, Netanyahu is the real president of the United States, and Trump is enslaved to him. God, we Americans have no memory. The Iranians killed thousands of Americans, and the bravest among us, our troops. And you guys all think that we went to war only because of Israel. It just means you don't care about the 250 Marines who were blown up in 1983. You don't care about the hundreds, at least, and certainly maybe thousands of soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan by IRGC, Iranian IEDs, those explosive devices that would blow up a Humvee, or would blow up a tank, or would just blow up a patrol of Marines. All Iranian murders of American soldiers. And you're telling me that the Prime Minister of Israel controls Trump. That means that you have contempt for American troops, and that freaking bothers me, let alone the fact that they said they're going to kill our president. That was enough of a reason to go to war with the country. When a country hires an assassin to kill your head of state, you go to war. I'm sorry, you do. Let me repeat that. If a country hires an assassin to kill your head of state, you go to war against that country. Period. If we knew that Nicaragua or even Russia, let's say we had found out that JFK was murdered by the Russians, and I'm not into conspiracy stuff. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But let's say we found out that the KGB had killed JFK. Would the United States have gone to war against Russia, knowing it would have been a nuclear war? Okay, what's your answer to that? That's a tough one, because a nuclear war is mad, mutual assured destruction.
I would say it would be very tempting, but only a fool who do not actually care about his people would go to nuclear war. It would be
Okay, but 1 second. But let's say we knew that Russia killed him. So you're saying, okay, you don't go to nuclear war. So you let them kill your president at 46 years old, blowing his head off, and his brains splattered all over his wife, and you do nothing? What would you have done?
I would have done a covert assassination of their president.
And that would have led to a war. Come on. Come on.
So millions dying for one man?
I'm saying it's a tough one.
Nuclear.
You see, our show, Gabe is my brother and my friend, and we talk. The reason I bring him into these conversations is that these are the conversations we have every day anyway. You know what I want this show to always be about? I don't want to answer every question. The power of Judaism is that we ask questions. That's a really good question. If we knew that Russia had killed JFK, if we had definitive proof, would Johnson have gone to war? And I actually believe there would have been enough pressure from the United States and outrage. You killed the president, that they would have gone to war. And maybe even a nuclear war. I don't think the United States could have turned away from it. I'm telling you. Would it have been smart? Wars are often governed by human passions.
unfortunately.
Yeah, but killing a president is big. The point is this. What is certain is that Iran hired assassins to kill President Trump. By the way, it's so interesting to me that some of America's leading commentators, like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, who hate Trump, that none of them are saying that maybe Trump went to war also like as a personal vendetta because they wanted to kill him. I mean, if I was president of the United States and a country tried to kill me, I don't know that I'd be so forgiving. I have to be honest. In any event, what did you want to tell me?
So there's one point, but there's something important, breaking news. Your video responding to the statue being smashed.
Yeah.
It was shared by Ion Palestine. They're one of the largest.
Right.
And they weren't critiquing you per se, but they were saying, why can't you just say this was wrong?
I did.
Why are you always trying to excuse it?
God Almighty, it's the exact opposite.
They played your whole video.
That's amazing.
And
What is Ion Palestine? An Israel hating thing?
Ion Palestine is the most credible watch source for all things happening to Palestinians.
Okay, well, you should show that to me. That's interesting. Look, you are a personal witness to the fact that not only am I not an Islamophobe, but precisely the opposite. I am arguably, I believe, as an Orthodox rabbi, the single greatest defender of Islam as a world religion, probably in the world. I am the one that says that we Jews have and I've said this going back to my Oxford days, 30 years ago, we Jews have a debt of gratitude to our Muslim brothers and sisters who took us in out of the Ottoman Turks, etc., after the Spanish expulsion. There was no Holocaust in Islamic lands. Jews were discriminated against traditionally. They had to pay a jizya, poll tax for being Jewish. And there were some murders, but you can't compare it to Catholic Europe. Christianity was who slaughtered Jews with crusades and auto da fes and expulsions in the Holocaust. There was never a Holocaust in Arab lands. I always say that. My enemy is the Islamists, not Muslims. I love my Muslim brothers and sisters. I say that on the record. So now let's come to so apparently an Israeli soldier saw in a Christian Arab village in Lebanon, if I'm saying the facts right, he saw a statue of Jesus and he took a pickaxe to it and he destroyed it. Let's first and foremost give credit to the IDF, who could easily have said, we don't know. The IDF immediately did an investigation and put out a public statement that the image is not AI, it's real, and it was done by an IDF soldier. That's number one. That's big stuff. Okay, they didn't have to admit it. You know that Hamas and all these Arab countries would never admit it to anything like that, number one. Number two, the IDF immediately said he would be punished. He's going to be court-martialed. Number three, the IDF immediately apologized to Christians around the world, even though it was one bad apple. You're going to get one bad apple. Okay, now, I did a video. Within minutes of hearing about this, I would say within 15 to 20 minutes of hearing about it, I sat down, took my phone, watched the video. And Gabe, I don't know what you mean that I Am Palestine said that I excuse it. I took this video and I said, let me just say that the IDF, to its credit, just admitted that an Israeli soldier destroyed a statue of Jesus. I said, this is disgusting. Jesus was a Jew. Not only does Israel respect all of its Christian residents, its Christian citizens, and of course, its Christian supporters around the world, but my children fight and put their lives on the line to defend Christian Israelis. My kids who are Jewish, 4 of them, and the IDF risk their lives to defend Israel's Muslim citizens, 1.9 million, Arab citizens, okay? No Arabs go to the IDF, they're not drafted. So Arabs do not fight to protect Jews in Israel. Jews fight to protect, that's a fact, no one can deny it, it's a fact, okay? And the IDF protects the Christians. And then I condemned this soldier. And I said, what he did is disgusting. And he has to be tried. And if found guilty, deserves a trial, then he should be court-martialed and thrown in jail. Absolutely. How did I in Palestine possibly criticize what I said? The Jews criticized me. My community criticized me. Why'd you bring attention to this story? I was criticized by the Jews. What was their problem with me? Speak loud. I want to hear you.
I think it's that, and I'm speaking free, and this is part of the conversation. I'm not critiquing you, but I think you might have just done it again. Can you say, not it's one bad apple, not...
But it is one bad apple.
Can't you just say, this soldier did a heinous act and I condemn him, without trying to explain that Israel...
No, Gabe, you would be right if there wasn't an organized attempt globally, and especially about people like Tucker Carlson, who's now trying to Islamify even Jesus. Did you see that Tucker Carlson started saying that Islam loves Jesus? Did he forget all the Crusades? Did he forget Saladin? I mean, it's almost laughable, right? All the Crusades were about the Christians trying to kill Muslims for having the city of Jesus, Jerusalem. But just a second. You would be correct if there wasn't a global attempt to discredit Israel in the eyes of Christians and to discredit the IDF, especially in the eyes of Christians. So of course I had to say that in the context of that defamation, this is one bad apple. And if it was systematic, if it was systemic, then fair enough. Of course I had to say that. You can't take it out of the context of the global libeling of the Jewish people. Your turn, go. You don't think I have a good point?
You do have a good point.
Okay, so that's what I said.
You have a good point for your audience.
Okay, well, wait. Let's go to another. Let's Americanize this for a second. So George Floyd was a criminal who apparently attacked a pregnant woman and went to jail. He then came out and he tried to reform his life, but he was on ketamine and other stuff. And then he passed a $20 bill, and then he was suffocated to death by a Minneapolis police officer named Derek Chauvin. Now, why do I say all those facts? Because as an American, when I watched Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd as he screamed, "I can't breathe," I was sickened to my stomach because I love America and I love the police. And this Derek Chauvin was one really bad apple. Now, notice that when Derek, and by the way, a lot of people said, oh, but George Floyd was a criminal. What does that have to do with a man being freaking killed by the police and suffocated? But everyone did point out that Derek Chauvin was one bad apple. He was tried. He was, I think, sentenced to prison for 25 years. Now, but here's the question. Why did they point out, like I did, this is one bad apple? I'll tell you why. Because many people in the Black community believe, and beyond the Black community, that racism among American law enforcement is systemic, that America is systemically racist in all levels of government, federal, state, local. I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that most cops are racist. I think Derek Chauvin was a really bad apple. So we say that he's a bad apple in the context of the defamation against law enforcement. That doesn't make sense to you?
It does, but it's part of a longer conversation for another episode, because I would say there are way more than one example for cop brutality against people of color. And I would say in an Israeli context, it gets a lot worse than one soldier smashing a Jesus statue. So I would agree that these are...
But you have to give examples. I mean, let's say you're right.
Gaza,
there should be evidence.
Gaza, and that brings us to our next point.
Yeah.
The United Nations and the European Union have put out a report today.
Yeah.
Front page of Al Jazeera. 71...
Great source, Al Jazeera. Go on, but I'll listen.
U.S. allies.
Of course. Qatar. Good people.
$71 billion to rebuild...
Oh, yeah, you said that to me. Okay. Wait. The UN. Wait. Let's just focus on this. I want to highlight your story. The UN and the EU are estimating that it would take $71 billion to rebuild Gaza after the war that was launched by Hamas on October 7th. Right. That might be accurate. I mean, even the Americans said it would take. Jared Kushner said it would take $50 billion. Okay, so what's $20 billion between you and me? Okay, fine. $70 billion. Go on.
I'm giving you a question.
Now, go ahead. Yes.
You understand that even though, and I'm talking about your opinion,
yep,
is not mine, even though what has happened in the Gaza Strip the past few years has been a nightmare, any loss of human life, you've said this, is
even one Arab child dying in Gaza was one too many, but it's Hamas's fault, correct?
But you said it was necessary in order to ensure the survival of the Jewish state.
Well, and to free the Palestinians who don't want to live under the brutality of Hamas. But go on.
Okay. So now, with the reconstruction,
you want to know if Israel should pay for it,
and I want to know a number. You have your total $71 billion.
Of course, Israel shouldn't pay a penny of it. I'll tell you why. Not a penny. Listen, let me tell you something. The United States didn't owe Europe anything after the Second World War, and yet the United States paid for almost everything through the Marshall Plan. But there was one major condition. Get rid of the Nazi government. Get rid of the dictatorships, and then we'll help you. And Japan. America reconstructed Japan. And they both worked. Germany and Japan till today have kept the peace. More importantly, they're incredible American trading partners and allies, and they're both democracies. But Gabe, you see, but America had no obligation. It was more charity to rebuild Europe. But you could say America did all the, and by the way, Britain didn't give anything. And of course, Britain frickin' bombed Germany to kingdom come. So why did America give it? Because America wanted to build democracy. Now, if you were to say to me, Shmuley, do you believe that it's in Israel's interests and its moral values, that if Hamas disappears and there's genuine democracy in Gaza, where Palestinians vote with self-determination, whether it's to be part of the United States, which Trump suggested, whether it's to be part of Israel, which I'm sure they would not vote for, or to get rid of Hamas, which I'm even more positive that they want to get rid of Hamas even more than being part of Israel, I really believe, yeah, then I think it's in Israel's interest to contribute $10, $20 billion. Sure, because then it's about democracy, freedom, liberty, and Israel would have a great trading partner. Gaza's gorgeous. I've been there, right? All the things that Trump said, that it could be this great Mecca in the Mediterranean, a vacation destination. But an obligation, especially if Hamas is running it, I wouldn't give Hamas $2. Why would I give Hamas $2 so they could take a 17-year-old Palestinian girl who had sex with her boyfriend and kill her? Why would I pay for that? Forget the Jews. Forget what they did to Jews. Let's say Israel didn't exist, God forbid. Let's say 6 million Jews. Okay, today's Yom Ha'atzmaut in 3 days, and they always do the census. There's 10,500,000 people living in Israel. 75% are Jews, 20% are Arabs, and 5% are Christians, etc. Okay, so 6.5 million Jews living in Israel. Let's say those 6.5 million Jews tomorrow say, you know what, this kind of sucks. Israel's 78 years old, constant war. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, loves us. Florida, has tons of room. He's given us all American citizenship to be residents of Florida. He even gave us first 10 years without, well, there is no state income tax in Florida. We're all leaving. And Israel shuts down, God forbid, through peaceful means, no war in America. And now all the Israelis are freaking buying kosher falafel in Bal Harbor, and they're on the beaches, and there's no war. No more Israel, God forbid. Would you still want Hamas to control Gaza?
I don't think anyone wants that.
Okay. So why would you want Israel to give them money at all?
Because
don't you want the people of Gaza to have a free election? That's what I want.
I want the people of Gaza to be able to have access to essential services that have been almost completely destroyed.
Because they lived under in the same way that, listen, all of Germany was destroyed living under Hitler. But the Germans were smart enough to blame the source, and it was Hitler. And because they got rid of Hitler, look how rich they are today. Look how quickly they rebounded. Germany was flattened in the Second World War. Within 10 years, they had the second strongest economy in Europe. And here we are 2 generations later, and they have the strongest economy. Third strongest, well, let's go through it. America's the biggest economy. China's number 2. Germany, maybe number 3, maybe Japan. But they're top 4, 75 years later. Because they got rid of Hitler. If they would have continued to have Hitler, they would be, they'd be flattened and dead, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, we got rid of Hitler, no?
No, but the German people didn't reconstitute the frickin' Nazi party, is what I'm saying. We insisted that they denazify. Why? We have to de-Hamasify. If you don't de-Hamasify, there's going to be a war forever. No, I don't think Israel is under any obligation, but I think it's in Israel's moral and economic interest to help rebuild Gaza if there are free elections and there's a government that is dedicated to the Abraham Accords and joins the Abraham Accords and wants to see Israel live side by side in peace and harmony.
If bless his memory, I'm going to assume that your most respected rabbi is the rabbi, right?
Yeah, is there a picture of the rabbi behind us? There should be. Okay, yes. The most respected rabbi that I ever encountered in my entire life, no question, was the rabbi.
If the rabbi, bless his memory, was alive today,
yeah,
and it was his decision,
yeah,
whether Israel should contribute any amount of funds towards this reconstruction campaign, what do you think the Rebbe would say from a Jewish? I
think the Rebbe would say what I just said. I think the Rebbe would say that from a Jewish values perspective, we have to be charitable and loving and gracious and benevolent to all of God's children, be they Jewish, Muslim, atheist, Hindu, black, white, everyone. Everyone is equally God's child. No one believes in that principle more than the Jews because no one gave the world that principle other than the Jews. We gave it in the first chapter of Genesis. Darwin gave us race theory, right? With blacks being, he actually said that they're the link between apes and humans. That is Darwinian. I'm not saying that modern day Darwinists believe that, but Charles Darwin definitely believed that. It's the Bible that said that blacks and whites, et cetera, are equal. Arabs and Jews are equal. I think the Rebbe would say if the money's going to terrorism, you don't give it. And if the money is going to a democratic government that wants to join the Abraham Accords, then you do give it. That's not like a simple answer. I still don't get what was the criticism that I on Palestine made of me when I condemned the action of that IDF soldier. I understand why the Jews are condemning me, because they're saying, with Israel getting so much critics, do you really need Rabbi Shmuley criticizing the IDF as well? And yes, I didn't criticize the IDF. I criticized one bad apple in the IDF, but yes, he has to be held accountable. The IDF criticized that IDF soldier.
The criticism, I'll repeat it.
Yes.
I would say typical with, and this is just my perspective, and it was shared in the comments on the video, which got tens of thousands of views, by the way.
Really? So again, I'm famous among all the people who hate my guts and want to kill me?
Yeah. I think when it comes to those who are publicly, visibly defending Israel, people feel as if there's never
a time when you just say, I condemn this.
Just take accountability.
You're saying, Shmuley, that you gave caveats.
Yes. Why can't we just condemn things? And this is just an example. Why can't we just say this is wrong?
I'll tell you why. Let's say for hundreds of years, Europeans believed that Jews actually were vampires, that they drank the blood of Christian children and put in their matzah. Right, Gabe? Okay. Now, let's say we found out that Jeffrey Dahmer was a Jew. And I don't know, did Jeffrey Dahmer eat the blood? Was he accountable? I don't know. He ate them. Okay. He wasn't a Jew. Let me just repeat. He was not a Jew. Okay. I know Candace. By the way, they're going to take that. You know how they edit me? You're going to see tomorrow. Rabbi Shmuley says Jeffrey Dahmer was a Jew. Okay. Let's say Jeffrey Dahmer was a Jew. And suddenly I'm doing a show and he gets caught and he's eating all his victims, you know. And let's not make light of it. The tragedy is unspeakable. And then I get on this show, Gabe, and I say, I want to speak about Jeffrey Dahmer, and I want to make it clear that we Jews, if he was Jewish, condemn this animal, this monster. There's no word for him. And of course, this does not reflect on Jews who don't eat people and don't drink blood. So you would say to me, Shmuley, why don't you just condemn Jeffrey Dahmer and not talk about, the blood libel against Jews for hundreds of years? Well, Gabe, but the blood libel is out there, and some people are even repeating it today, like Candace Owens, who liked a tweet that Rabbi Shmuley drinks Christian blood, okay? You can't say not to give caveats when Jews are being maligned every single day.
But we're not, and I say this with all due respect to my Jewish brothers and sisters, in our context, I'm not going to say we're not victims, because this is the Rabbi Shmuley show, but we're not the only victims.
Of course we're not the only victims.
Also being maligned every
Who
day.
is? Who's being maligned?
Palestinians and people in South Lebanon.
Wait a second. Okay, see, that's a good discussion.
They're also victims.
No, that's a good discussion. Is Islamophobia real? First of all, among white supremacists, you know what's interesting? See, I would normally say among Nazis and white supremacists, of course, you expect them to be the biggest Islamophobes because they're brown, right? And it turns out, though, but Hitler loved the Arabs, and Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, became...
He was a bad apple.
He literally became a Nazi. Okay.
He was a bad apple.
No, but now you have... Fair enough. Okay. But now you have... He was a bad apple whose corrosiveness made many other bad apples. But you now have people like Tucker Carlson not only not being Islamophobes, but saying he wants to bring Sharia law to America. And he's a white supremacist. So everything has gotten very confusing. But let's just talk about this for a second. Is Islamophobia real? Yeah. In the same way racism is real, in the same way anti-Semitism is real. The question is, how much is there? I don't believe Americans ever cared whether Muslims came to the United States or not. Until Islam became so associated and connected with global terrorism, that's when Islamophobia, I think there was a cause to it. Now, I don't excuse it. Let me be clear. To blame the average, okay, this is what I would say. There's about 1.3 billion Muslims in the world. I believe 10% have been radicalized. I believe 90% are God-fearing and want to live peaceful lives, and they're very good people. So that gives you 1 billion people who are God-fearing. But I think about 300 million may have been radicalized and want to see Israel destroyed, want to see Jews killed, want to see the West destroyed. Unfortunately, a lot of them are very vocal, living in cities like London or Birmingham or Brussels or Amsterdam. And they give Islam a very bad name. And the problem is that the mainstream Islamic leaders are not condemning them, okay? So when Baruch Goldstein, a Jewish terrorist settler, and the settlers are not terrorists. They're either patriots, in my opinion, but he was a terrorist. When Baruch Goldstein, 1994, killed about 29 Muslims at prayer, I condemned him, and my house was firebombed 2 days later in Oxford. We Jews, thank God, don't have a lot of terrorists who are running around screaming, Moses is great, and blowing themselves up. If we did, and if Jews like me did not condemn them, then people would begin to associate terrorism with Jews. Thank God you can't associate terrorism with Jews, because Jews are never guilty of any acts of terrorism anywhere in the world, with what the enemies of the Jews would say is the exception of the state of Israel. They say, oh, Israel's a terrorist. But in other words, even the worst anti-Semites would never say the Jews of Sydney, Australia are terrorists. They're not. They would never say the Jews of New York are terrorists. They're not. They would never say the Jews of Los Angeles or St. Louis or the Jews of Tokyo, I don't know how many Jews there are in Tokyo, are terrorists. They're not. They have to always go back to Israel, which is fighting for its existence, to claim terrorism. That's not true of Islamists, where people are killing in the name of Islam in all the cities I just mentioned, Gabe. And in that sense, it doesn't excuse Islamophobia, but you begin to understand why people say, if we allow Muslims into our country, are they going to integrate? Are they going to accept democratic norms? Or are they going to separate? Now, anyone who wants to circumscribe Muslim immigration into America is an Islamophobe and is desecrating American values. But I still believe that given the global threat that we face from that 10% who've been radicalized, I do think that it's fair for Muslims who want to come to America on a green card for us to look at their social media posts and look at anything that they've said. Do it for everyone, by the way. Do it for Jews as well. Do it for Israelis too. I got no issue with that. It's just that unfortunately, here in New York, you're not seeing a lot of Jews screaming, may Moses be blessed, and then pulling, and then flying a plane into a building. Those were 19 Islamists that did that. So Islamophobia is inexcusable, but there is a foundation for it in the minds of many Americans who associate Islam with terrorism, and their mistake is not to call them Islamists, because Islamists is the political faction of Islam that wants to see Islam turned into a militarized weapon. Islam is a religion of prayer, fasting, charity, family. It's a great world religion. That's their problem. They can't distinguish. But we do have to make sure that Muslims who come into the United States are not Islamists. In the same way, we have to make sure that anyone else who comes to this country is not here to sow discord. But I will say this, look, do Orthodox Jews in Muncie, well, Crown Heights Chabad is much more, modern in that it, associates with the outside world. But do I believe that the Satmar Hasidim, ultra-Orthodox in Williamsburg, or the ultra-Orthodox Jews of Lakewood, New Jersey, or of Borough Park, New York, do they fully assimilate into American society? No, they do not. They actually are afraid of a lot of American influences, secular influences. They hate the internet because of porn. They're not going to watch Netflix. So how are they different to Muslims in London who segregate, or in Malmo in Sweden? Here's the difference. The Jews of these cities may not embrace secular American values, or they may not want to look at the cleavage of Sydney Sweeney, but they don't reject American freedoms. They don't want to take the Torah and make it impose on all Americans, right, Big Gabe? Muncie, New York wants to live with Shabbat, but they don't want Gentiles in Manhattan to have to observe the Shabbat. They're not calling for all frickin' buses to be stopped in Manhattan on Shabbat. The problem with the Islamists in London or Malmo or Sydney, Australia, is that they want to impose Sharia. They're not only segregating themselves from mainstream society, they want to impose their belief system and make Australia into an Islamist country. Do you agree with that?
I would say I do not think that's a significant amount of Muslims.
Would you say that they are that significant or not? They're the most vocal.
I would not say that either. I've never heard of calls for Sharia law in Malmo.
In London or Malmo or Brussels?
Perhaps I'm not watching the same Instagram reels as you.
Oh, it's not on Al Jazeera? Oh. Okay. We've been going quite a while. By the way, I want to thank Gabe. He's a brother to me, and he makes me think. I want you to also know that Gabe and I love each other, but we couldn't disagree more on everything. I wish the world was more like that. I'll tell you why it's like that. Because for whatever flaws I have, I'd like to believe that Gabe looks at my heart and my character, and whatever flaws he has, which are probably less than my own, I have to be honest, I look at his heart and his character, and opinions become far less important. It's actually so sick that we all judge each other based on opinions. And you know what? It's not only immoral, it would make the world so boring. One of the reasons that I don't watch a lot of conservative podcasters, even though a lot of them are my friends, is that I just don't want to, I don't want to hear all the people saying, I couldn't agree with you more. Or the liberals, same thing, couldn't agree with you more. Whatever happened to like the fascination of diversity, let alone the morality of it. I mean, the fascination of it. Okay, God bless you all. Until next time. Oh! You got to order this now, Shmuley.com. My son, Mendy, who's fighting right now in the war, I'm not going to say where he is, but he's fighting in the war right now, is the co-author of this book. He's also the chief English speechwriter for the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ochana, who gave us the quote on the front of the book. Father and son captures Israel's dramatic turnaround in a way that is both insightful and consistently thrilling. Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ochana. You have to order this now. Go to Shmuley.com, shmuley.com, and you'll get it signed, God willing. Gabe, we got to have me start signing like 25,000 books. Got to take care of that. Should I do that with an auto pen, or should I sign them? What do you think, Gabe? You got to sign them, right? I shouldn't pull a Biden. Got to get a little dig in on Biden. I actually feel bad for Biden because his health isn't. I pray for him. I always liked Biden. He wasn't my choice as president, but I think he's a good person. But he used an auto pen way too much, so I shouldn't. Order Comeback Nation now. And all of you, please pray for the safety of my IDF hero children, especially my son, Mendy. God bless you.